Hey guys, so these videos will just be quick, short examples of just some techniques that can be used for a bunch of different things, but um, just in addition to the classes that I teach. So what I have here is just the start of a really simple game. Top-down view, players running through this little maze type area. And so what we are going to look at here is if we wanted to create some sort of mini map. Now, mini maps, there's a ton of ways to do it. And the way that I'm going to show you in this video is not always the best way. In fact, I would say it's oftentimes not the best way. But since we have something that is super low poly here, we're drawing um, 8,000 triangles. Like that's super low poly, and so we can afford the inefficiency that this way represents. And so first off, we have to have some sort of canvas, like a player HUD or something like that. So we don't have that in our level now. So I'm going to go ahead and create a canvas that will be my player HUD. And that is where our mini map is going to be displayed. Now, the reason why this technique is not always the best way and why the number of triangles that we're pushing comes into this is what I'm going to do is actually just set up another camera and project the view from that other camera onto the HUD. And so I'm going to go to my player and right click and create a camera. For this, I'm going to call it Minimap camera. Now, on this camera, it has an audio listener. We can only ever have one active audio listener in the scene at any time. I don't need the audio listener for my Minimap, and so I'm going to go ahead and remove that. And we don't want this, like we can only have one active camera in the scene at any given time also. And so this camera, instead of trying to project to our view, which right here it's taking over where we would really want the main camera to be the active camera. And so we're going to project everything that we see to that onto a texture. And so first off, I need to get this in the right position. So I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees on my x-axis, and then I'm going to pull it way up. Now, maybe that's not the perfect view, but we'll be able to decide a little more once we get it actually showing onto our HUD. Now, in order for this to project onto a texture, we have to create a special kind of texture that it's going to show to, and that's called a render texture. And so in my materials folder, I'm going to go to create, and I'm going to choose to create a render texture. I'm going to call this my minimap rend text. And so this render texture will be the recipient of whatever that camera is displaying. And so I'm going to go back to my minimap camera, and we have this section down here called target texture, which is looking for a render texture. And so I'm just going to drag that minimap render texture in here, and now that camera only renders to this render texture. So if I run it right now, it's not going to take over my camera anymore. I'm back to my original camera, and so which is still a top-down view, but it's not as far. And so like this one's at 80, this one's at 25. And then I need to show that on my HUD. So I'm going to jump into 2D mode, work on my HUD. And so I'm going to right click on player HUD to create a child object of that. And what I need to choose is a raw image. And so with a raw image, I'm able to put a render texture into that. And so I'm going to increase my width, change my anchor so that anchor's down in the bottom left, and move this kind of down here. And then for the texture, for this image, I can just drop that render texture in here. And now when I run it, I have my mini map down here that's showing the higher up view, and then I have my normal camera view. Now, like I said, this is not super efficient because if I jump over to the stats now, you can see I'm drawing twice as many triangles. And so if you're dealing with a high poly scene, this is not the best way to do it. And so you just, like everything in coding, there's always a bunch of ways to do things. The other problem is it's kind of hard to see my player. And so one of the tricks that I can do here is, let's jump into my player. So I'm going to drop out of 2D. I'm going to come down, zoom in on my player. And so my player's kind of small-ish for a camera that's that far away. And so I'm going to come in and create a 3D object that is a sphere. I'm going to move that up above my player. And then I'm going to scale it up so that it's twice as big. And so twice as big of a circle. I'm going to go ahead and put the same material on it as the player so that in my mini map it will look the same. Now if I just run it like this, it's just gonna, I'm seeing it in that normal camera, right? But what I can do with this sphere is I can change the layer, and since I don't have any layers that, actually I'll just choose the UI layer. I could go into add layer, actually we'll do add layer. So I'm going to go into add layer and I'm going to label this as minimap only. Okay, and so if I go back to my player, now I can choose that minimap only layer for this sphere. And then I can go to my main camera. And right now the culling mask is everything, meaning it's showing us everything that's in the scene. But I can come down here and uncheck the minimap only, and it's not going to record that in my scene. So now I don't see the circle here, but I have the bigger circle here. And so we can control what we see and what we don't see in our minimap by using that culling mask. And so I could also, if I wanted to with this, I could actually, turn this into more of an arrow. What did I do? So let's shrink this down so it's kind of flat. Now I'm going to duplicate it, rotate it, shrink it down this way. So get a good top-down view. Now in this case, this doesn't necessarily make sense for the way that we have our game designed because the player doesn't rotate, but let's say if the player did rotate and we wanted to have some sort of arrow that indicated what direction they're facing. In our mini map, we really can't see. We'd have to make it even bigger. That's a big ugly arrow. But we can kind of see that we have this arrow type shape. Now the problem is I also have colliders on all of those, and they're hitting my player and not letting me move. So disable the colliders on them. And so now we can see that we kind of have this arrow on there. And we can play around with other stuff on it. These currently have shadow casting turned on, and so we would want to turn the shadow casting off. If you had better art, or if you spent more time making better arrows, you could make things look better. This would be actually a good thing to do for our enemies. Once we get enemies running around, would be to put an arrow over their heads so we can see what direction they're facing. So anyway, that's just one really quick, really simple, no code way to create a mini map. But again, not a super efficient way because it's doubling our rendering overhead. But if you're dealing with a small level that has low poly low poly count, then it's a quick, easy way to do it. So anyway, hope you enjoyed that.